Welcome to the No Limit, No Boundaries UFO podcast. Veteran UFO investigators Dan Spell and Mike Pinicello take on all aspects of the UFO phenomena with insight and honesty. It's all fair game here. No limits, no boundaries. And now, here are your hosts, Dan and Mike.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Dan and I are happy to be back. We've had a little bit of a break, but we are now back. And tonight we're going to be talking about Valiant Thor. Again, as always, when you listen to the podcast and you have a question or you have a comment or a thought, please post it in the comments page of the episode, or you can email us and we can talk about it on the next podcast. But first, before we begin tonight's discussion on the Valiant Thor, for those of you that are following UFO Twitterverse or the news, yesterday on April 20th, we had UFO hearings on Capitol Hill. So this is a continuation of the Arrow program that was started back in June of, was it 2022?
Yes.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that because it's a timely manner, and we're filming the day after. And then once we finish that discussion, we'll move into Valiant Thor. So Dan, how are you tonight? How
I'm
you
doing very well, Mike. Thanks. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you. So
the hearing that just took place on Capitol Hill, a lot of people are going to say, wow, that's a whole lot of nothing. They said nothing, they revealed nothing. But am I wrong? Did they not include conversations about those objects that were seen in Iraq? You're familiar with that? That especially the one sphere that was filmed flying. I don't know if it was Baghdad or Mosul or one of the towns in Iraq.
Why don't you tell our audience, because they might not be familiar with it.
Well, there's videos out of a spherical shaped object that was filmed in Iraq in a war zone. This was a while ago that it was filmed, but they don't know what it is. I guess it is truly unidentified. Doesn't mean it's a UFO alien type of thing, but they don't know what that spherical object was. And it was traveling incredibly low and incredibly fast over war zone. And that is a concern. It's not the only object that has been reported over there, but they do have that one video online that people really should check out.
We'll post the link in our show notes to it.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know that they talked a lot about different topics, but I believe the general conclusion of the hearing was that they really didn't find anything of substance that would show that there were extraterrestrials visiting Earth. Now, how they lumped that video in, I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember off the top of my head, but
now let me ask you, Mike, while they may have said, well, we don't see anything that suggests an extraterrestrial activity, they didn't exactly, it's how you interpret what they say. Okay, maybe nothing is there, but they can't disprove it either. They can't disprove it. They said, well, we don't see any evidence, but they didn't exactly say, no, it is not extraterrestrial.
correct.
It wasn't an emphatic no. It was more of a.
And the program is not being shut down, I don't believe, right? So that, in addition, so if
that would be the Arrow program, right?
Correct. Yes.
That's the group that took over for the UAP task force.
Right.
And they just rebranded it as the Arrow.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. The wording is definitely telling, as we talked about in previous podcasts. These government agencies spend a lot of time using precise wording. They're not loose with what they say. They're not.
Right. Well, they did not find any evidence that it is, but they didn't come out and say, no, it isn't.
That
You
is
know,
true.
it's all in how you interpret what they say, how they parse their words.
True. And the program is still running, like I said earlier. I
Yeah,
mean, to
yeah,
me, that's the most important thing, is that
it is.
they could have said, you know, we looked into this, we spent
Yeah,
X amount of money and X amount of time, we can't find anything, we're shutting it down.
yeah.
But they're
Nothing
not
to
doing
see
that.
here. Move along. But they haven't
Right.
done that.
Right, exactly. So I don't know about you, but I'm still hopeful. I think that the fact that they're still running the program, that it's still being funded, that Congress is still looking for answers from them with these hearings and reports that they submit, shows that UFOs are still relevant, and you know, maybe the next time they'll come out with something.
Okay. So Mike, one thing I wanted to talk with you about tonight, because you're the state director of MUFON in Connecticut. A while back, I had the opportunity to chat with Cheryl Costa.
Yes.
Cheryl's well known in the UFO community, and she said that, and we were talking about upstate New York, up along the Hudson River. For a time, it was a hot spot for UFO activity.
Oh, sure.
And what she said was, no, you know, in fact, that's no longer the case. And she mentioned Long Island, New York, as really being the current hotspot. So what I wanted to ask you about tonight was, in Connecticut, there's at least one submarine base. Is it in Groton
Yes.
or New London? One
No,
of
it's
the
in
two.
Groton. But
In
Groton and
Groton.
New London are right next to each other.
Yes. So, and Long Island is just across the sound, correct?
Yes.
From
And there's
Groton.
also I think an Air Force base or an Army base that's pretty big in Long Island, because our Air National Guard and at Bradley and over the border in Westover Air Force Base, a lot of their helicopters fly between the two. I don't remember off the top of my head what the name of that base is in Long Island, but it's a pretty active base.
So my question then is, do you think, based on what Cheryl said, that if in fact those are UAPs or UFOs, that they have a keen interest in the submarine base in Groton and, as you just pointed out, that air base on Long Island?
It would make sense. You know, they're not diesel submarines, they're nuclear powered submarines.
That's the key, right?
Yeah.
It's the nuclear power angle that they may be interested in.
No, I don't believe they stored nuclear weapons there. But the other thing we have along our shoreline is the Millstone nuclear power plant, which is pretty close to Groton.
Okay, there you go.
And it's a commercial power plant. So that's again, you know, the nuclear connection.
In fact, it was that way up on the Hudson River too. There was a lot of activity seen very near a nuclear power plant along the Hudson River,
right,
going up towards West Point.
But you know, we still get reports of triangle UFOs along the Connecticut-New York border. Fairfield County and Litchfield County are the two counties that border the Connecticut and New York border. From Fairfield County goes down right along the shoreline to like middle of the state of New York, upstate New York, by maybe what was it, Poughkeepsie, or White Plains, and then Litchfield County goes from there up to the Mass border, and so yeah, we still get triangle UFO reporting sightings. So even though that's no longer a hot spot for New York, we still do get a lot of triangles from that side of the state. So, just as a little FYI on a side tip, on a side discussion.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Valiant Thor. I'm going to open up and share the PowerPoint. Valiant Thor is kind of a legendary story in the UFO community. Back in 1957, according to the story, a UFO landed in Alexandria, Virginia, which, Mike, as you hopefully you know, is directly across the river from the US Capitol and very near the Pentagon. And the story goes that a tall white male came out of the craft, and a police officer who had he apparently saw it land and drove over near the craft, and this being walked out, identified himself as Valiant Thor, sent by something allegedly called the High Council. Now, the High Council, Mike, kind of reminds me of another group that is being talked about a lot, and that is the Galactic Federation. So, do we have a contradiction here? So, the Valiant Thor is supposedly from Venus, right, which is in our galaxy. So, what's then? Is the High Council the same thing as the so-called Galactic Federation?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind when you say that in the change in names is it could very well be the same, or it could be a variation of the same. And what I'm thinking of off the top of my head is the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations.
Right.
So maybe it's possible that this was the High Council is Valiant Thor's precursor to the United Nations, which is now the Galactic Federation. Maybe they've added more.
That's possible. And then apparently
I do find it
taken
interesting
to the
Venus,
Pentagon. Valiant Thor was, and he requested to speak with then President Eisenhower, with Ike. And let's talk about that name for a second, Valiant Thor. As you know, the name Thor, it comes from Norse legends, right?
Correct.
And I forget what he was the god of war. I believe something like that. So my question would be,
I think he also was the god of thunder, because I think
that could be it. Thor is either the god of war or thunder, one of the two. So,
but I think, and my mythology is not great, I think that eventually Thor is also a reference to going back to the Greeks, which was Zeus. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the connection between them. I don't know.
You may be right about that. My question to you, buddy, is this. Why would someone coming from Venus have a name that that's a very human name, coming right out of the gods? What are the odds of a guy from Venus having an Earth god name, unless he made it up, just so he could relate to people?
Well, it's very possible. I mean, because in 1957, I don't think, if you would have said the Galactic Federation, I think the High Council maybe would have been more culturally appropriate for the time, more palatable. Yes. Venus, people could relate more to Venus. I mean, our space program, even though we haven't left the solar system, we have a much broader sense of the universe through our probes and our telescopes, like the Hubble and now the James Webb, the Kepler telescope that found like thousands of planets. But in 1957, we weren't even at the moon yet. So our version of the universe was Mars and Venus, and
Right.
you know, we didn't go much past. I mean, yes, we knew the other planets existed, of course. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is to say I come from Alpha Centauri, or you know, where some of the newer species say they are coming from. I don't know if that would have related as well if someone said Venus, because in 1957, Venus was still a pretty mysterious planet.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that would make sense if you were to relate to the people. Would it be to pick mythology and nomenclature that would be more culturally appropriate for the time?
Are you familiar with Alexandria at all? Have you ever been down here and gone around?
Alexandria, the
Virginia.
city? Oh, yeah. I mean, I passed through it, but I've never actually been there, like stayed and explored it.
Another question I have, and maybe you can educate me about this, is as I said earlier, that's right across the river from the US Capitol and basically adjacent to the Pentagon. Those are highly controlled airspaces. Even back in the late 1950s, there was a lot of air defense radar and air traffic control radar and other things. Wouldn't you think that that craft would have been picked up by radar, whether civilian or military, coming that close to the US Capitol and the White House?
Sure.
I mean,
But I don't think there's anything they could have done about it. Very much like that wave of UFOs that were in the 1950s. And
right, but at least then they scrambled fighters to go up and take a look and engage with them.
So, question for you. This, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I apologize. I know
That's okay.
it's probably a bad ufologist to not know this. What year was it supposedly when Eisenhower ditched his security protection?
Oh, it's right in that ballpark time frame. I can't tell you exactly what year.
Because I guess my question would be was maybe this was planned. Maybe that was something they discussed at that meeting. Like, we're going to send someone, and that's why there wasn't really a response to it.
Okay. And another question I have is, law enforcement are trained to react to situations, sometimes very forcefully. And the way the story is told, that this cop, Alexandria police officer, pulled up, got out of his cruiser, and he did not engage this being with his revolver drawn, didn't order him to stand in, anything that you would think that a law enforcement officer would do, seeing that type of a craft land and someone come out of it. You'd think he would have radioed for backup and said, hey, we have a situation here. I need help.
Right.
And wouldn't he and his superiors have notified the military immediately? Right. I would think, but these are questions that make me doubt the whole story. Of course, I wasn't there, so.
Well, if I could play devil's advocate, and not be the objective investigator, maybe why they didn't react more like a law enforcement is one of the things that they abductees say often with when they interact with extraterrestrial beings is that they have the ability to telepathically talk to them, to read their mind. Maybe that extends to controlling and manipulating their behavior. Maybe Valiant Thor did that to them. And I know that I'm basically trying to justify this story, and it's not very objective of me. I realize that, but I'm just playing devil's advocate. That maybe, in more modern ufology, we almost accept telepathic communication and alien telepathy, and sometimes with alien abductions encounters, people often say they feel powerless and they can't control it. I can give you an example. I heard a witness at one of my meetings who said that they the being was in their bedroom, but they were somehow pinned to their bed. They could not move.
Right.
It was like they were powerless to do anything. So if they can control them through their minds, maybe that's why these police officers didn't react in more of a law enforcement manner. I don't know.
Okay. So
sorry, I mean,
that's okay. You don't need to apologize. It's a good discussion. So there, with the red circle, is the person allegedly known as Valiant Thor. Okay. There's also another picture coming up here. And this picture was supposedly taken in New Jersey at a picnic of some type, that Valiant Thor and these two other Venetians or Venusians. I don't know. Is that the same guy in this picture?
He looks like he has blonde hair, and he
Blonde
looks more
or gray, right?
but he has a different jawline.
Yeah, that's a very square jaw. He does too, I guess.
Yeah, but the other one, see,
Which one?
go back, see how pronounced, like, to me it looks like his jaw's more pronounced. Yes, it's square, but see how it sticks out more from his nose,
jutting out. Yeah.
and the other guy, if you go to the second guy,
Sure, hold on one sec.
like, it, I know it's a different profile, and that'll, but it doesn't seem as, it seems more of like a normal jawline, like how some people just have very strong jaws, and
Right.
it doesn't. But as on a side note, I just Googled, and IMDb, the day the Earth stood still, which sounds very much like this Valiant Thor, was released in 1951.
51.
So I mean, a lot of what this is exactly what that movie is. The
Right.
alien landing.
Yeah, a benign alien comes to Earth and gives a message to humanity to basically clean up its act, right?
Yeah.
That's the standard, at least for one part of the UFO community. Aliens are our helpers, they're coming to save us from ourselves.
Right.
But I got to tell you, this, now
They don't look
the
the
legend
same.
is Valiant Thor was only here for 3 years. Okay. Now I don't know when this picture was taken and this one was taken, but that's a profound difference in his hair to have taken place in 3 years.
The other one looks like it was at some kind of military briefing.
Yeah, it is. It's a briefing of some type. I don't know what it is, of course.
So it would make sense then that the person's hair would have a military cut to it.
The cut, yes, but not the color.
This almost looks like it's on a ship. See the bulkheading on top, the open pipes, like, it doesn't look like an office building.
Looks like any type. Well, no. There are some government offices that aren't that great. This could be one of them. It's hard to tell. And I don't think men back in the mid to late 50s dyed their hair color. Maybe they did, but I don't think they did it very often. That's why I'm pointing out the difference in the hair. Is that even the same individual?
I don't know. It looks like a different individual.
Yeah. So the whole thing, the legend of Valiant Thor, has been promoted as fact on TV shows such as Ancient Aliens, and there was even a book written about it called Stranger at the Pentagon by a gentleman named Reverend Frank Stranges, oddly enough, with that last name.
And how did this Reverend know about Valiant Thor? Was he a Reverend at the Pentagon when Thor was
That
there?
I'm not sure about. but he's the one who has been the big purporter of the legend of Valiant Thor. And there's a little bit more on the landing in March of 57. 3-year mission to invite the Earth to join the interstellar community. And maybe that's the difference between the Galactic Federation and this other group. Interstellar means, I think, our galaxy and beyond. Does that sound
That's the way
about
I
right?
understand interstellar, yeah. Does the Pentagon even have apartments, Adam?
Did they have what?
Apartments? Because it says here they put
That's
them
what
up.
that's what
you
the
know.
legend says. They put him up in an apartment. I've been to the Pentagon a few times. I've never seen an apartment there, but that doesn't mean that there isn't. I just don't know.
Hmm.
And of course, he traveled around and met with many government officials. And then he dematerialized in 1960, 3 years to the day after he landed. So there's a lot of broad things that we know about it, but we don't know a whole lot of detail. If this is in fact true, who did he meet with? What did they decide? And as you pointed out earlier, was this set up when Eisenhower allegedly met with extraterrestrials out in California?
Nixon has a long history of being involved with UFOs. The most
Yeah, that's
famous of
true.
it is him and Jackie Gleason. When
Yeah, that's a legendary story itself. How Nixon allegedly picked up Jackie Gleason and took him to an Air Force base in Florida and showed him what we have.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Star Trek, the original series, started in 1966.
Really. So a little bit about Valiant Thor's anatomy. As we saw earlier, he appears human, except he has 6 fingers and 6 toes, has a larger heart than what we have, and instead of 2 lungs, we have a left and right. Valiant Thor apparently only had 1. And blood vessels are larger and carry hemocyanin based blood. What that means, I don't know. And his brain capacity is 300 cubic centimeters. I have no idea what the human brain size is, but his skull, his head didn't look any different than a human being's skull, did it? So if his brain was a lot bigger, you would think his head would be a lot bigger too.
The human brain has a volume about 1,300 cubic centimeters.
1,300
cubic centimeters.
So that number there, that came that the data came out of Wikipedia about the legend. That can't be correct then, can it?
I don't think so. Well, it's to the 3rd power, so
yeah,
it would be a much bigger brain.
It would,
and
yeah,
he looked like a normal sized person in both those photos. Like he didn't have, but if you were to say that, I don't know what those, what kind of makes me think of, if you're going to have a bigger brain, is those elongated skulls that that has been like on Ancient Aliens and found around the world.
Yeah,
that makes a little more sense to me then.
Yeah, but he looks nothing like that at all.
Correct. Yes.
And his IQ, according to the story, is 1,200. Now, I don't know what the average human IQ is. I think I have one, but it's certainly nowhere near 1200. What is genius? About 160 IQ?
160.
Something
The
like
average
that.
is about 100, according
Okay.
to this thing.
So his IQ is 12 times the average human.
Scores above 130 are labeled as average or very superior.
Okay.
And then anything lower than like 80, yeah. While scores under 70 would be considered like borderline impaired.
Yeah. And he apparently was able to speak 100 human languages, all fluently. You would have to have a superior IQ to be able to do that, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, I think I remember hearing somewhere that humans might be actually much smarter than they appear to be, because we only use like, was it 10% of our brain or 8% of our brain? But if we were to ever evolve and start using more of our brain, our IQ might actually go up, which might also unleash other things like telekinesis and telepathy and things like that, which might explain why, if he could subdue those officers, if he had used more of his brain, he might have been able to access more abilities than the average human.
I sure would like to get a copy of that police officer's report, because he probably, if this happened, he filed a report, which is standard procedure.
It's nowhere on the internet.
It's probably if this happened, that report is either long destroyed or long locked away.
Yeah, that's true.
And definitely probably not available to the public.
Well, any of our listeners who are listening to this, if you have a copy of the report, email it to us, please. Scan it and send it our way. You never know.
There's got to be some way to look at data. I don't mean like what's general things on the internet, but looking at other reports from that time, from whether it's newspaper reports, radio, anything like that, to try to somehow prove or disprove that that thing actually landed that day. It's a very specific date. It didn't say, early March of 57. It didn't say that. It was very precise.
The radio, I'm not sure if they'd archive something that long. Police reports probably would have been destroyed by now. They passed.
I would think so. Although if that happened, you'd think that the Alexandria Police Department would hand that over to whomever, the FBI, Virginia State Police, or DOD. Probably
at the time, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, I investigated a case in Connecticut in the 80s, and we tried to file a FOIA request for the police log in the 80s for the state police, and there was no way to get that. That was paper lost in some archive somewhere, and the state wanted nothing to do with that. So we didn't get it, or it was destroyed, one or the other. But going back to 1950s, I doubt there's no way to get that. And there were no computers back then. It was all typed up, I'm sure. Your best bet would probably be the newspapers. Yeah. And most likely it'll be microfiche by this time. But if you went to the local libraries around the area, you might be able to find people who they might have been interviewed, might be there. But it'll be a lot of hands-on, foot on the ground kind of thing, It's not going to be an internet search for sure. Right. But that would be pretty cool if you could substantiate that. Do you think, Mike, that the people who create and produce Ancient Aliens would have put that out as fact if they didn't think it was?
or don't they care? They just want to have ratings.
I mean, all TV shows want ratings.
Right. But
I think I think their intentions are good. I think like anything in ufology, you can go both ways on it. Like and just in our conversation today, I played devil's advocate to try and justify things that I had no evidence at all to say that that's what happened. There was not even circumstantial evidence to say like this alien mind controlled them, yet that's what I put out. But my intentions were good to try and justify it to happen. So I think that Ancient Aliens and all these shows and these authors have the best of intentions. But I think this is the nature of our field. There is, even when you have primary source documents like a government document, it's redacted and you're kind of reading between the lines. And as we talked about with the UFO hearings, we're analyzing the wording that they did not find extraterrestrials, but they just said they did not find extraterrestrials. So like there's still hope. So I think this field is very ambiguous and you can argue it either way depending on how you want. And I think even with the best of intentions, it's always going to run in the gray, and you can go either way on it. So I think the Ancient Aliens has done a great job with a lot of what they've researched, and some of the people who are on those shows I've talked to at conventions, and I think that they have the best of intentions on. So I would err on saying I don't think they misled us on purpose. I think their true intention was to present the evidence. But like everything, this field is a gray area. It's a puzzle wrapped in an enigma, and depending on how you, the viewer, you can interpret it any way you want. But I don't think so. I don't think there was malice. I think they had the best of intentions.
Okay, that's a good way to be, Mike. You know, don't think everybody's out to, you know, pull the wool over our eyes and take advantage of us. It's not a bad way to be at all.
I mean, I watch the show every Friday. I think it's great. I've never read the Frank Sanders book, so I can't comment on him. I had never actually even heard of it. So that's a bad ufologist on my end, but I'll read it. I'll definitely go look for it, but I can't.
Oh, good, because this story has been around forever. It really
What do you
has.
think? Did you read this story? Did you read his book?
No, just the research that I've done. I haven't read Frank Strange's book, but
well, let me ask you, what do you think on the same question? Do you think Ancient Aliens and these authors and commentary people on these shows mislead us on purpose?
I wouldn't say that they. It's not that nefarious. I think that a lot of the people that do that are in it for money and fame. That's why you see probably how many, Mike? 5 or 6 of the same people all the time on these shows.
Mm-hmm.
Like Nick Pope from the UK.
Right.
He has found a way to parlay his government experience into a lucrative livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is all of what he says, you know, is it inaccurate? Is it false? Is it misleading? I can't say that. But anytime you have people making a lucrative living off of something, so for me, it's a red flag. All right, what's going on here? What's the agenda? Is it really what they think, or are they just trying to make a buck off of it?
Right.
So I'm more of a skeptic for a lot of those people, just because they're the same talking heads all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And yeah, I do think that's part of the problem with ufology, getting off of this topic. I do think that it's the old guard is still on the top, but and it doesn't seem like, I look at a lot of UFO conventions speaker lists, and there are some people that come on, but the thing that I think hurts our field the most is that the research, the so-called, and I put in quote, research, is not really research. People use that word so loosely today, and it's not. Like, if you're going through the academic rigor of an investigation of actual research, most of the stuff that's put out there by a lot of these different people, and I won't say names because I don't want to accuse anyone or anything, but in general, wouldn't hold academic muster to anything. They can't even be peer reviewed. Not that we have a peer review process in our, unless you count, like, social media as peer review, because they can be pretty tough on each other. But
Sure.
um I think that if I think so, yes, I think that the standard of some of these people is probably, like you said, to find a nook to make a living off of.
Oh,
And
I absolutely believe that.
it's not so much to do credible investigations or credible and accurate research.
I
And I'll leave it
think
at that.
one thing that jumps out at me is they give us all these theories, conspiracy theories, all these legends and stories, but not one of them has ever provided the smoking gun evidence that there is an ET presence here. There's a lot
Well,
of stories, a lot of legends, but none of these people have been able to prove anything. At least not that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong.
well, yes, you're right. And even some of the stuff that has been put forth as evidence is not really, eventually it comes out as it's man-made. Like, they say we have this piece of metal that's unknown, and eventually it becomes known, oh, it's just some kind of aluminum that's common. um you're right, but again, I think that, people are, I think there's a real rush to capitalize on this field. It's all over the television, it's all over the internet, and it's so easy to make a few bucks off of this. If you have a very good website that has a lot of interesting stuff, you can make money just on clicks. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can, podcasters now are making money off of ads. It's um and just as a disclaimer, we're not getting paid for this. So
No,
for
we
those
are
of you
not.
that are going
We
to
are
say
doing this
where
on
you
our
guys
own.
are making money off of this little YouTube podcast, we are not getting anything. So
And
um
it's the appetite for this information has not subsided. I mean, people have been really fascinated by this topic for generations, going back to the 50s, 80 years ago.
but what has changed is the type of information they want. People do not want factual information. They want the sensationalized stuff. We're in a society now where the more sensational, the more tabloid like it is, the better. They eat it up. But
Yeah,
if you give them the documents and you go through like a FOIA document, and they fall asleep. I have seen it at conferences, I have seen it in lectures, where if you provide information that is quality researched information, people are bored out of their mind. They have their heads down, they are daydreaming, But if you go up there and you talk about the wildest thing you can think about, they're captivated. And that's great. But that also forces, like what we were saying earlier, for people to have to choose if they want to make a living at this to be sensational, which then waters down the quality of the product they put out there.
Oh yeah, and there are other people like Stephen Greer. He is a big CE5 guy, and what gets me about him is he'll share. Oh yeah, I'll show you how to get in touch with visitors, the ETs. But you gotta pay. You got to pay to get the information. And there are others. It's not just Stephen Greer. If they had that information that would change humanity forever, they would give it to you. They would give it to humanity rather than making money off of it and making a career.
Right.
And to me, that's a red flag. Nope, this guy's he's not credible. Or maybe he was at one point, but now he's into making movies and documentaries and being famous. But
So
anyway, we did drift off a little bit, but that's okay. This is a fascinating topic to talk about.
But it does relate to this topic, because when you're looking at the Valiant Thor story, it is so it's when the Earth still stood still as a UFO story. I mean, everything about this story is that movie, and the movie came out prior to the story, but it's so outlandish, it's so crazy. There's no documentation to prove any of this. There's no witnesses that can prove any of this. And those two photos, I'm sure if you have the technical know-how and the technology, you could probably do some kind of facial recognition, or measure the eyeballs and see the distance between them and say, well, this guy has like what the agencies can do. But we don't have that ability. They do, but I don't think we can go up to your old employer and say, hey, can you run facial rec on these and give me the measurements? But that being said, our conversation is related very much to this, because it is exactly this that we're talking about. It's a great story.
It's an example of the sensationalism that's going on. And
so I don't think we veered off too far. And I do like this story, but I don't know. Me personally, for the fact of the fiction part, I kind of put this more on the fiction side. I don't think there's enough information to prove that it ever happened.
Yes. And if you're going to make claims like this, you better have some way to prove it. Otherwise, it's just making money off of a story.
Right. And I haven't read that book, so I can't speak on that book. But I'm sure, like we said earlier, that the best of intentions are made for everyone. But this is such a gray area, this field, that it really comes down to the viewer. Does the viewer want to believe this? Or they don't want to believe this? And I'm not a skeptic, but I try to be pretty objective in ufology, and I have pretty high standards, so I don't really think much of this
As
story.
we all should, Mike, as UFO investigators, we have to be objective and at times skeptical if it's needed, depending on the situation. How else can you be a good investigator if you're not?
And then that works against us, because people say that we're just out to debunk everything. And
no, I'm not out to debunk anything. I'm objective. I'm open-minded, and I know you are too.
Well, yeah, and it's like that old saying, you cry wolf one too many times, when you actually have a wolf, no one's going to believe you. So if everything's a UFO and then you really actually have a UFO sighting, people are going to be like, well, here he is again. Everything's a UFO.
Yep.
But
you know what? I think we should invite our audience to judge for themselves.
I agree.
Get a copy of the book if you're interested, folks. Do some research. Let us know what you think. Tell us what you think about the legend of Valiant Thor. Is it real or is it BS?
And if you have information like the police report, send it to us.
Yes.
Just don't send us classified stuff.
And of course, we always welcome your feedback on how we're doing on our podcast. Please don't hesitate to let us know. Okay. And if you have ideas for a future podcast episode, we welcome that too.
Oh, for future podcasts, what are we doing next month, Dan?
We have to decide that, Mike.
Okay,
We
let's
haven't
do
picked
it.
that out yet, but rest assured, we will pick a good one.
Yeah, we will. And if you guys on the listening to us have a podcast suggestion, email it to us or put it in our comments block. And we will research it to see if it's feasible to be put together. As you can see from what we put out there, Dan does all the research. He does an excellent job, but he finds the evidence and the documentation. So if we can't do your podcast, it's because there's just not enough there to make a podcast. It's not that we ignored you. It's just that
Yes,
we have pretty high standards for what we put on the podcast in the way of evidence.
okay, Mike, I think we're all set here. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you on the podcast.
Same here, Dan. I enjoyed myself. I had a wonderful time.
Mike, thank you so much. We'll see you on the next podcast.
See you then.